Okay, my scholars, if you were meditating, you can start to slowly come back to us. If you are doing the free write, now is the time to email me your prompts. I'll return back into the room, our respective rooms, and let's direct our attention back to our class session. If you chose to write, and I really do look forward to reading these prompts, please email me right now as you're doing that. We can go over our class rules. Be prompt, be prepared, be polite, and be a promoter of learning. The last one is my favorite, as you know. Let's all choose one right now that we can focus on during this lesson. Today's lesson is investigating the speaker of a poem. Um, we're going to talk about the difference between an author and a speaker or a narrator as it pertains to poetry. And we'll be doing this by looking at two poems. We're going to analyze them together. So first, let's meet our poet, Mr. Langston Hughes. Mr. Eccles, are you there? What do you know about Mr. Hughes? You can write that in the chat. You know he's a poet. That's good. um, what about Miss Davis? Miss Davis, do you know anything about the poet Langston Hughes? Harlem Renaissance. Yes, that's a great starting off point. Mr. Hughes got his fame, his notoriety during the Harlem Renaissance. This is the 1920s, America 1920s. What's so really cool and exciting about this period in time is that African Americans are purposefully, enthusiastically embracing black aesthetics. And that was in music, that was in movies, theater, and of course, literature. You know, this is the time when you have the first black film director. You have the first black all um, musical review. You know, there's a lot of firsts in this time. And we also look at this moment in time as having sensitive language. And that's important to know for an English class. Um, you know, in the lexicon of American English are, you know, words that we don't use today, such as Negro. The Negro speaks of rivers. That is Mr. Hughes' most well-known collection of poems. He was also a um, a playwright. Black Nativity is a play. He was, you know, an essayist, children's books, novelist. He wrote everything, all, you know, all types of genres and formats. Again, through the perspective and just a true appreciation uh, using the black aesthetics. Um, Mr. Hughes, if you look at his, you know, birth and death dates, he comes of age during separate but equal. You know, he comes of age during the Jim Crow era. He lived through the Great Depression. He lived through World War II, right? I also want to share, you know, there are some biographers who mention that Langston Hughes could have been bisexual. Um, you know, back then, the queer life was a taboo. Um, Not so much persecution for it, but a lot of coded words were used, such as the life. So Mr. Hughes could have been living in the life, but it was certainly nothing that you were open about if he had a homosexual relationship. Um, one more thing is that he was a Guggenheim Fellow. That's what really gave him his start in terms of that's when he was mostly recognized, I would say, in the American canon. His start came with The Crisis. He was published in The Crisis as a poet, and The Crisis was a NAACP magazine. Before we get to his poetry, let's get to the meat of the lesson. We are going to identify the speaker in the poem, okay? The first thing you need to know is that the speaker or the narrator is not the author. When I ask you, who is the speaker in this Langston Hughes poem that we're going to look at, the answer will not be Langston Hughes. He and all poets write in the voice of someone. It's usually never themselves. Um, the speaker also tells the story. The author is writing the story, right? But this is the poems will be in a speaker's voice. There is only one speaker in a poem, and oddly enough, the speaker can be a person, place, or thing. The poems that we're going to look at, the two poems, the speaker will be a person. This is important to know because the number one thing I want you to take from this lesson is that the speaker can be identified by three labels. What do I mean by labels? Categories. The way that another person would identify themselves, right? So here's our girl. She's looking for the labels. Here are just 5 labels out of many, right? There are so many labels, but we can start with gender. That is a label. How do you identify? How does the speaker narrator identify? Male, female, trans, non-binary, the whole gamut, right? Gender is important to most individuals, and it's also usually important in poetry. Here's another label that we will be trying to look for in the poems. Education. Are they book smart? Are they street smart? Where were they raised? What are they learning? Are they in school? Are they well read? You can you'll be able to detect this, by the language itself. Are there colloquialisms? Are there any slang terms? Okay. So before I share the other 3 labels that we could, pay attention to in our poems, I'd like for you in the chat, you tell me some labels that might appear, in these 3 boxes. What are other ways that people identify themselves, right? How do they identify themselves? What categories? Just give me a list right now in the chat. The same way that we identify a speaker is the same way that we identify other people. What labels are out there? What categories? Miss Davis wrote race. It's a very good one. Of course, cultural background. That's an important thing to a lot of people. And it is important in poetry, particularly in Langston Hughes' poetry. I'm going to move forward, okay? Age is one, right? Millennial, Gen Z, baby boomers. When you were, what the age that you are helps determine your outlook in life, and what's important to you, right? So age is going to be important in identifying the speaker, if you can, with the poetry. Race, we mentioned, very big label in Langston Hughes' poetry. And economic status. Um, this is important too. You know, if wealth or lack of wealth will determine your outlook on life, or will have a great effect on it at least, you know. So these are all labels that we can choose from, right? When we identify our speaker. Again, there's more politics, a Democrat, Republican, Independent, religion, not religion. Uh, there are a ton of ways to identify a speaker. The main thing is if you give me three, then you have given me a lot. You've given me plenty. All you need is three labels to identify the speaker, and they will help us determine how to read the poem. So let's jump into the poetry.